2 winters ago, my girlfriend Emily and I rented a remote cabin in the Adirondacks for New Year's. We both wanted an escape. No fireworks, no parties, no neighbors. Just us, snow, and silence. The drive up took hours, winding through empty roads and small mountain towns where half the shops had closed for the season signs. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was setting, staining the snow a deep orange. It was beautiful, almost unreal. The cabin itself was perfect. 2 bedrooms, a wood-burning stove, and massive floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out on nothing but forest. The snow outside was untouched, like a white sheet stretched tight over the earth. Emily pressed her hands to the glass and whispered how it felt like we were the only people in the world. That first night was cozy. We played cards by the fire, cooked a simple dinner, and drank cheap wine straight from the bottle. Around midnight, we climbed into bed, the wind howling softly through the trees outside. Emily fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't. My mind wouldn't settle, so I padded back out to the living room and curled up with a book on the couch. Around 2 a.m, I looked up and froze. Outside the big window, half hidden in the trees, was a man. He wasn't moving. He just stood there, his body swallowed by shadows, his face pale in the moonlight. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the longer I stared, the clearer he became. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and holding something metallic that caught the moonlight. I stayed perfectly still. My book slid out of my lap. My heart thudded in my ears so loudly I was afraid he'd hear it. I wanted to wake Emily, but I couldn't make myself move. I kept telling myself it had to be a tree stump, or maybe a trick of the snow. But then I blinked, and he was closer. No movement, no footsteps, just closer. I shot up, ran to the bedroom, and shook Emily awake. My voice cracked as I tried to explain. She stumbled groggily to the window, but when she looked, the man was gone. "Babe," she whispered, almost laughing. "You scared me." There's nothing out there. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the certainty of what I'd seen. The face, the metallic glint, the way he'd somehow closed the distance without moving. Emily eventually went back to bed. I didn't. I sat in the living room, lights off, staring at the tree line. My chest tightened with every creak of the house, every shift of the wind. And then, just before 4 a.m., I heard it. Snow crunching outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I crept to the window and felt my stomach drop. Fresh boot prints trailed through the snow, leading right up to the glass, inches away from where I stood. I swallowed hard and reached for Emily again, but something stopped me. The prints. They weren't leading to the cabin. They were leading away. Which meant, when I first saw him, he wasn't in the trees. He was already at the window, already staring in. By dawn, I was shaking. I stepped outside just long enough to see for myself. The prints circled the cabin. They stopped by every window, even the one in our bedroom. That was it for me. I told Emily we were leaving. She thought I was being paranoid, but the look on my face must have convinced her, because she didn't argue. We packed quickly, our bags heavy with damp clothes and half-eaten groceries. As I carried the last bag to the car, Emily's voice rang out from the living room. "What the hell is this?" I rushed inside. She was pointing at the big window, her face pale. On the inside of the glass, written in the fog of our own breath, were the words, "See you soon." We bolted. Didn't clean, didn't check the rooms, didn't even lock the door. Just threw everything in the trunk and drove until we hit a gas station 2 hours away. I never went back. Neither did Emily. The rental company never contacted us, and I sure as hell wasn't going to contact them. But here's the part I can't get out of my head. When we were packing, Emily swore she had shut every curtain the night before. Every single one. But when we left, the big window was bare, wide open to the forest. Meaning whoever wrote that message had been inside. And every New Year's since, when the world outside is quiet and still, I catch myself staring at my own windows, waiting for a pale face to appear in the glass. Last spring, 2 of my closest friends, Megan and James, talked me into renting a cabin deep in the Smoky Mountains. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, a little kitchen, and a deck overlooking thick woods. The rental site had a handful of grainy photos, but it was cheap, and the listing said it was perfect for hikers seeking peace and privacy. When we pulled up, the place looked exactly like what you'd expect from a cheap rental. Peeling paint, a sagging porch, and shutters hanging crooked. Inside, the air was stale and faintly damp, like the cabin hadn't been opened in months. The overhead lights flickered when we flipped them on, but we laughed it off. We were there for a quiet getaway, not luxury. That first evening, we made spaghetti, opened a bottle of wine, and played cards around the rickety table. The silence outside was heavy, the kind that makes your ears ring because you realize how much background noise you're used to in daily life. No cars, no neighbors, not even crickets. Just us. Around midnight, we heard it. A sharp tap against the big back window. At first we froze, looking at one another. James shrugged and said it was probably a branch in the wind. But when I glanced outside, the trees weren't moving at all. The air was still. Then it came again. Louder this time. Tap. 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 Megan muttered, "That's not the wind," her voice low and tight. She wanted us to check the porch. Against my better judgment, James and I stepped out with a flashlight. The beam cut across the deck, the railings, the empty chairs. Nothing. Not even animal tracks in the thin layer of dust and pollen on the wood. We went back inside, locked the door, and sat down again. But my stomach was in knots. A few minutes later, the tapping resumed. Faster. More insistent, like fingernails rapping against the glass. James stood abruptly and yanked the curtain back, then immediately dropped it, his face going pale. "There's someone out there," he whispered. His voice shook in a way I had never heard before. The 3 of us went completely silent. The tapping stopped. For several long seconds, there was nothing. Then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the deck. Slow, heavy, measured. They moved along the outside wall of the cabin, from window to window. We could hear the boards creak under the weight, the deliberate pauses as if whoever, or whatever, it was stopped to peer inside. Megan started crying quietly. James motioned for us to get down on the floor, away from the windows. We crawled into the corner, huddled together, the only light coming from the faint glow of the wood stove. The footsteps circled the cabin. Once, twice, 3 times, each lap slower, dragging out the torture. At one point, they stopped directly outside the kitchen window. We could hear breathing, slow, heavy, almost wet. None of us slept that night. We stayed awake until the gray light of morning seeped through the curtains. Finally, when we dared to look, the deck was covered in prints. But they weren't footprints. They were handprints. Muddy, smeared, dozens of them. Pressed against the glass, the railings, the deck floor itself. Some were small, like a child's. Others were long and spindly, with fingers stretched far too wide. The strangest part? The mud wasn't fresh. It was dry, cracked, like it had been there for years. We packed and left within the hour. None of us said much on the drive home. I haven't been on a cabin trip since. Last fall, my friend Sarah invited me to spend a weekend at her uncle's cabin in northern Vermont. She promised it would be a quiet escape, just the 2 of us, some hiking, and campfires under the stars. I didn't know much about the cabin except that her uncle had stopped going there after her aunt passed. The drive was long, twisting through endless back roads that seemed to get narrower the farther north we went. When we finally arrived, the place looked like it had been dropped in the middle of nowhere. A sagging little cabin with peeling paint, surrounded by miles of forest that seemed to press in on every side. There was no electricity, no running water, just a wood stove, oil lanterns, and a pump out back for water. Rustic didn't even begin to cover it. That first night after we made dinner on the wood stove, Sarah fell asleep quickly, but I stayed up, sitting by the dim glow of the lantern, listening to the fire crackle. The silence was heavy. No cars, no distant houses, not even animals. Just silence. And then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the stove groaning as it cooled, But the sound came again, a faint, low humming, almost like a man's voice. It rose and fell in a strange rhythm, too steady to be random. It was coming from beneath the floorboards. I leaned down, pressing my ear to the wood. The humming grew louder, clearer. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like someone chanting, slow and deep, over and over. My chest tightened. I shook Sarah awake and told her what I heard. She froze, staring at me in the dim light. Then she said quietly, "My uncle told me once, never to go under the cabin. Ever." I laughed nervously, waiting for her to smile or tell me it was a joke, but she didn't. She just turned over and pulled the blanket up to her chin, eyes wide open. The next day, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was wind through the boards, maybe pipes, maybe my imagination. But that night, it happened again. The humming started low, then turned into whispers. Soft, overlapping, dozens of voices murmuring beneath us. Some of them laughed. Others sighed like they were exhausted. And some hissed words I almost understood. I thought I heard my name. At one point, Sarah sat bolt upright in bed, eyes glazed, and whispered, "They're under us." Her voice wasn't her own. It was flat, distant, like she was repeating something she didn't want to say. The whispers rose into frantic chattering, filling the cabin like a swarm of insects. The lantern flickered wildly, then went out. We sat in darkness, clutching each other, listening to the voices until the first hint of dawn crept through the cracks in the shutters. We didn't wait. We grabbed our bags, shoved them into the car, and drove off without looking back. When I asked Sarah later what her uncle meant about never going under the cabin, she wouldn't answer. She just said, "He nailed the crawlspace shut." Said, "Once you hear them, they don't stop." To this day, when I'm lying in bed at night and the house creaks, I swear I sometimes hear it again. That low, steady humming, rising through the floor.